is the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app and, of course, streaming on YouTube at the Team 980. And right now, it is our pleasure to welcome in the man who has called more Dallas Cowboys games on television than anyone else while Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator there. It is Fox Sports play-by-play ace Kevin Burkhardt. Kevin, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for your time.
Greg, good to be back, buddy. All good, my friend.
Yeah, it is. It's a fun time here in D.C. Obviously, it's not maybe the sexy hire, the young hotshot guy, but Dan Quinn, super solid. You've gotten to talk to him so much over the last 3 years. I say Dan Quinn to you. What immediately comes to mind?
Well, I think it's a great hire, and I know Ben Johnson was linked for a long time, and I'm sure Commanders fans think, okay, great, get the offensive coordinator, figure out the quarterback and go from there. But I think Dan Quinn's perfect for Washington for a number of reasons. I think he's an unreal culture builder and leader of men. I mean, anyone that's ever played for him, coached under him, there's so many coaches in the league that, love him, a la, LaFleur, Shanahan, McDaniel, guys that just credit a lot of their success to him coaching under him. And then the players just run through a wall for him, right? So just in terms of a culture builder and a leader of men, and I think they need a whole culture redo there, right? And I think that's what Josh Harris and the new ownership's trying to do. Just kind of start over, and start from square one, right? So I think DQ is a perfect guy to do that. And then I think for me, when you look at Washington last year, the most disappointing thing was their defense. I mean, they've got good players on their defense, and they were atrocious in a lot of areas last year. And I don't know that a lot of people saw that coming. I think people thought they would struggle a little bit on offense, but the defense would keep them in a lot of games. Well, it really didn't. And I think if you want a guy to fix that, well, his defenses in Dallas were great every single year. And I know, the latest rendition example is the wild card game against Green Bay. They got torn up. So that's tough if you're a Washington fan. You're just looking at that. But look at the body of work. His time in Dallas. Look at the body of work, his defenses, and I think he grew so much as a defensive coordinator in Dallas than he had been in Atlanta and Seattle. He's told us that many times. He's added so many different things to his repertoire. So I think you look at all that, I think it's really the perfect hire for them. Now they just got to figure out who's going to be the offensive coordinator, who's going to be the quarterback next year. Yeah,
small little things that every NFL team doesn't struggle with for decades.
Exactly.
Just ask, this team or the Chicago Bears or on down the list things go. You talk about the things that he's learned, the way he's adapted. I think there's very basic things that most football fans understand. Like he ran that cover 3 basically exclusively in Seattle, and they were the best defense in football 2 years running with him as the DC there. He now runs a bunch of different coverage structures and mixes it up. But, since you guys talked to him about it, what are some of the things he learned? And maybe even if there were any points in those discussions where he talked about like, hey, if I'm ever the head guy again, I definitely do this differently than he did in Atlanta, and how that evolution happened over the last, let's say, decade since he left Seattle.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that, yes, that you're exactly right. That was the system in Seattle, and he carried that over basically to Atlanta. Well, then you think about that where they were predominantly zone, and they played the most man in the NFL this year, right? And the reason is because he adapted to his personnel. They had guys that played man very, very well, and they had 3 big safeties who can run and cover tight ends and versatile. They had a lot of versatile players, like these hybrid, quasi linebacker safety guys that were able to do a lot of different things with them. He figured out how to use them all in ways that got the most out of them, with Hooker and Kearse and Donovan Wilson. I thought it was awesome what he did with them. So I think just that alone, his ability to change and adapt to personnel, his ability this year to move around Micah Parsons more than anything else. And people say, okay, well, that's easy. You move Micah Parsons from one side to the middle. But what you don't realize is that affects the whole rest of the defense, right? When he moves, there's got to be communication with everybody else to account for where he's not. So I just think those are 2 examples I give about things that he has done to change and how he's adapted. And to me, that's the number one thing. But I think in a head coach, look, in today's NFL, you're obviously a lot of the time looking for an offensive play caller, because then you don't lose the play caller, right? The play caller stays as head coach. You're not going to lose them in a year or two to a head coaching job. But I think the number one thing is you got to have a leader of men. And I look at D'Amico Ryans this year in Houston. A big reason why they won. He was so revered as a player, and certainly as a staff member and then defensive coordinator of 49ers, as a leader of men, as a guy that controlled the room. And I think that's what you're looking for. I don't think there's anybody better than building a culture than Dan. I don't. So I really like that for Washington for that hire.
Kevin Burkhardt, Fox Sports, with us here on the Hoffman Show. So, Kevin, I will now do the thing that I've done to basically everyone who says what you just said, and ask a question on behalf of the fan base. I've certainly given my answer, but the culture builder, yada, yada, that stuff sounds a lot like what Ron Rivera was supposed to be. When you look at DQ, why do you think it's going to be different for DQ than it was for Rivera for any reason that you see fit?
Well, I think the biggest reason is because they've got a completely different hierarchy, right? New ownership group, and then, a lot of new parts of the front office. And Adam Peters is a guy who is ultra respected around the league, and I think he's really smart. He worked well with John Lynch in San Francisco, and I know he thought highly of him. And I think you have to have that working together scenario where the front office and the head coach are in step. I think San Francisco is the model, right? That's the model where you have a GM and a coach who are tight, who get along, who make decisions together, but they don't interfere in one another's business. There's still a kind of a separation there. They work together on everything, but there's still John's a GM, Kyle's a coach. There's no overlapping. Well, I think when Ron was there was nothing but overlapping and everything else that, I don't think it was ever a clean operation. So that's the difference. And I think it could be a potentially a huge difference.
No, I totally agree. I am curious real quick, since you do spend an inordinate amount of time with Greg Olson, and you guys did cover a number of Washington games, even if it was mostly when they were playing Dallas, because that's what your bosses like to do, is send you guys to Dallas Cowboys games. When you would talk to Greg about what went wrong here and what needed to change here, because he knows Ron so well, having been a part of the best years of Carolina's run with him, what were those conversations like, as much as you can share?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak for Greg, who loves Ron Rivera, right? He's got the utmost respect for Ron Rivera and, playing for him and winning a lot of games for him and going to the Super Bowl with him. So I know as a man, he loves him. I know as a head coach, he loves him as well. And I think, look, you could cite a lot of things of what did happen or didn't happen, but the reality is you got to win. And the reality is they didn't find a quarterback. That's it. I think there's a lot of things, but I think if you're going to narrow it down, Craig, I don't show me the head coach that has won consistently without a quarterback. And you can make the case. Okay, you say, well, Kyle Shanahan's had a little bit of rotation out there, right? He's figured out a way to win. Okay, you can make that argument, but Jimmy G was pretty good for them, and Brock Purdy's been excellent for them. Just show me the coach. I don't know who that is. And the reality is, since they moved on from Kirk Cousins, they haven't figured it out. And so until they do, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a huge part of it. And I think, like you said earlier too, the setup was just so bad, and the culture. The idea that Ron could change the culture never worked because Ron was doing a million things other than being a football coach. And now Dan Quinn just gets to be a football coach because Adam's in charge and you have a better leadership structure from the top. I think all of those things. There were endless problems, Kevin. We saw what happened here.
Yeah,
there's problems for days and weeks and months.
It's gone on for a long time, right? But that's the hope with the new ownership group and some new pieces in the front office and leadership by Adam and Dan, right? The hope is it's going to be different. And look, by the way, on the quarterback thing, I'm not saying Sam Howell can't be the guy, and maybe they draft a guy at 2, maybe they stick with Sam. I thought that he was put in a tough position, and they threw the ball a million times with him last year. He didn't have a lot of help. I thought he did some really good things, and he's got some talent. I like Sam. So I'm not saying that they don't have the quarterback now. I'm just saying that the structure that was there, along with the rotation of quarterbacks, and they had a bunch, as you know, it's just got to be better. They have to figure that part out. And, I think they all know that. But I just will say, I understand what fans are, looking for the they're looking for the light switch in Washington and turn it on because it's an unbelievable fan base that's been dormant. They haven't had a lot to cheer about in a long, long time. But I do like what they've done this offseason. Like, let's start there, and we'll see where it goes. But at least right now, I'm on board with it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's so hard to try to make sense of what that roster was last year because, again, just so many issues, coaching staff, environment, et cetera. And that's going to be Adam Peters and Dan Quinn's job to sort through it all, see what they have. Last thing I want to ask you, though, on the way out is Kevin Burkhardt, play-by-play for Fox Sports, is our guest, is what does this do for Dallas? Because obviously that's an in-division opponent 2 times a year, going to see them. Mike McCarthy now, like, he's on the weirdest hot seat you see in professional sports, which is, hey, dude, you've won 12 games, 3 straight years. Excellent job. Do it again and do better, or you're going to get fired. He's now got to replace his defensive coordinator, and it looks like DQ might be bringing some of his top lieutenants here to D.C. Where does this leave the Cowboys going into next year?
Well, it's going to be a tough guy to replace, right? But I'll be curious to see if they stay in-house or if they go, outside. I think, Greg Olson said this on the playoff game. I think they were right. I agree with Greg. I think they were right to keep Mike McCarthy. Dak Prescott had the best year of his career. I don't think it was an accident. Mike McCarthy knows how to coach quarterbacks. And offensively, they were fantastic this year. They laid an egg in the playoff game. Like, that's on everybody, right? Of course, the head coach gets some of the blame, but I always think, who are you going to do to be better? Who's going to be better? If you get rid of him or if you change quarterbacks or whatever it is, that's fine. Who's going to be better? So I think it was smart they brought back Mike McCarthy. And now to replace DQ, yeah, I think that'll be interesting. It's been a good pairing. They've really worked well together. They've got a lot of respect for each other. And that defense, I think a big part of that defense, when Cowboys with that explosive offense would get the lead, they would kind of unleash the D. The thing where the D, sometimes last year when they got behind, they had trouble stopping the run because they didn't really have the personnel to stop it. A lot of those hybrid players, they didn't have like the big linebackers or the super big interior linemen to get that done. So I'm curious. Look, I think if they stay in-house, they've got some really good candidates. Maybe it's an Al Harris, who's their secondary coach, who's done some great things, obviously, with the secondary. I know Mike Zimmer came out yesterday and said he'd be interested in that job. That's a really interesting option considering, which I think could work with their personnel. So I think they've got a lot of options, but I think it'll be different. And I think they may try to approach it a little bit differently. But I don't think it'll be easy. Dan did an amazing job there. That's why he's got another head coaching job.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, Kevin Burkhardt, Fox Sports. You see him on the lead game every single week of the NFL season. KB, hopefully we get a chance to run into each other next week in Vegas. I know you got so much going on, but regardless of whether I get to see you in person or not, always appreciate your time on the show, and hopefully nice and easy travels for you, and we'll see you out there.
Craig, good to catch up, man. Be well. Talk soon.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.